just heard from an amazing lineup of researchers, right? Talking about the ins and outs of what it is that they do to not just look through the microscope, but to really connect with communities and get substantive research happening. This panel, panel number 2, is going to be hearing from the practitioners. What it is that they do related to grabbing that research and infusing that research into the plans, the policies, the projects, all the different initiatives that they work on as practitioners. We have stacked the deck today with an amazing lineup of different bounding boxes. From the biggest, the federal government, we've got AJ Moses, and he's with the U.S. Forest Service. Then the next bounding box is at the statewide level. Clesi Bennett from the California Natural Resources Agency is here to talk with all of us. Then going down to the municipal bounding box level, we've got John Swae from the city of San Francisco. And then Cindy Blain is a nonprofit, California ReLeaf, and she kind of actually bounds all boxes. She's connected with the federal level, she's working at the statewide level, and then she's also working with member organizations that are down at that local level as well. So we're gonna get to hear from all of them today about how it is that they utilize research in the work that we do as practitioners. So I'm extremely excited to hear some of their insights and then ask them some very tough questions at the end. So without further ado, hopefully they knock the cones off your pines with their presentations. But with that, I will invite AJ Moses up to the podium.
Hey folks, AJ Moses. I'm a science delivery specialist with the Pacific Southwest Research Station, and in a second I'll kind of get into kind of what that organization is. And I'm just kind of going to be giving you a little bit of an overview of kind of how we classify science delivery. It's fairly new in the Forest Service. My position has only existed for just under 2 years, and that's true across all of our research stations for the Forest Service. So just a quick overview. You've heard a little bit from this morning. So the Forest Service has different arms. I'm a part of the research and development arm of the Forest Service, which is where all of our science delivery specialists are currently housed. Although that does not mean that we're the only people that do science delivery and science communication in the Forest Service. So specifically, and my teeth got cut off there a little bit, but the Pacific Southwest Research Station, we cover California, Hawaii, and the U.S. affiliate Pacific Islands. And I work out of the Riverside office, which is not too far, and that's where most of our folks who are down here working in either urban forestry or the LA area are also stationed as well. And our other science delivery specialist is stationed in Hilo, working out of Hawaii. So, what is science delivery? So about a year ago, when all of these positions were fairly new, we'd only been here for a couple of months, everyone kind of got together who was doing science delivery in the Forest Service at a little bit of a retreat in North Carolina to kind of talk about what is science delivery and communication. And the big thing we came up with is that it's knowledge exchange. And in a way that kind of seems almost counterintuitive based on what the actual title is of science delivery. It almost implies that we are just sending information out to the people who need it. But in reality, science delivery is about also taking in information into our institutions and figuring out how we can get research to be answering questions that not only our practitioners need, but also getting information out to them in a way that's useful and that they can utilize that in their everyday work. And so those practitioners, you can see here, they can be for the public, they can be for private landowners, they can even be for the Forest Service itself. You saw those little arms that I had there before. Not all the arms in the Forest Service are always talking to each other. So part of that is about making sure that we can get our information here in R&D, maybe to the National Forest System where they're using that, or to state and private where they're working for our practitioners in cities and local governments. And also, more importantly, there might be overlap. In your organizations, you probably don't have a science delivery specialist. You might have public affairs, legislative affairs, legal affairs, science writers, technical editors, social media coordinators, etc. So these are all the kind of overlapping positions in what we're doing and how we talk about our research and our work. So it's also about relationship building. It's great that I kind of got to follow all of the researchers who were talking earlier to hear what they had to say, because it really does hit home in terms of what is science delivery. And that is that we have to build relationships in order to communicate our work. Science can sometimes be complicated. Science is sometimes difficult to talk about. And also, sometimes us as a federal entity is not the best organization to talk about our work because it's about building trust within communities. And so we need to build our relationship with not just other organizations so that we understand research, we understand the work that we're talking about, but also so we understand the right pathways to go about talking about our research and making sure that the communities that we're working within trust our institutions. And so the $1,000,000 question is, what's the best way to communicate science, right? And obviously that's sort of a loaded question and there is no right answer. So it's kind of, that depends. That depends on your stakeholders, that depends on your organizations and the rules that you have to work within. For us, we do things like, we have a newsletter, we have news articles that we put out, we have webinars, we have fact sheets and one-pagers. We also have social media. And it goes on and on. Websites, brochures. This is a picture from a congressional meeting. So just talking in person. So we have all of these kind of options for how we talk about our work for the Forest Service. But at the end of the day, what's important here is, I'm not sure how my white box is there, but what's important here is that you ask your audience. So one of the things, because my position is relatively new, we had to figure out how do we communicate our work. And ultimately, we kind of figured out we had to ask the audiences. But some of the, I'd say, limitations, and I'll get into a little bit more of our limitations in a few slides, is that we cannot, for example, survey the public. That's just one of our rules. We can, but there's kind of a lot of loopholes you have to jump through. So what does that mean? That's where that relationship building comes back into play. And so we work with our partners to kind of survey some of the folks, the practitioners in forestry here in California, to say, hey, what's the most useful products or information for you accessing and applying research to the work that you're doing every day? Okay, awesome, show that. And what sort of we got from that is just a little graph here, and some of the labels are a little bit small, but ultimately these top categories here are email, newsletters, scientific journals and publications, and workshops. So folks want to have digestible work, they want to meet and talk about that work in person, and they also want the technical and scientific applications of that work in articles and in publications, but it's important that we're meeting them in a place that they can digest that work and where they can actually apply that. And so that's where we've been spending most of our time. And so getting back again into some of our limitations, so research systems are not designed for science delivery. So we've heard a little bit earlier about how publications is one of the biggest things that researchers are kind of graded on, and that's true here in the federal government as well. We don't have the tenure process, but we have a paneling process that's pretty similar. And so what that means is when we need to talk about our science communications, when we need to share the work that we're actually doing, researchers aren't actually always incentivized to do that, to work within that realm. Practitioners have problems now, and research takes time. That's a big one for us. People have questions, they want to answer their questions, and we don't always have an answer immediately because research does take time. And stakeholder time and attention span. So people have a limited amount of time. They have to do their day jobs, they have to work, they have to solve these problems now, they need things in the interim. But again, we essentially have to take our time and do our due diligence in how we are putting out our research. And so for us, that sort of means making sure that we are looking at how we are making our work accessible and how we are formatting it. And of course, bureaucracy. And that's sort of a little bit what I talked about earlier with the surveys. So it's like taking a look at what options we have to work within the confines that you have at your organization. The federal government's a little bit bigger, we have very certain rules, but also about making those partnerships to make sure that you can get what you need done. So, some of the improvements we've been trying to implement here in the Forest Service, so embedding communication staff for the starter projects. So I myself am starting to get involved in some of our projects for the wildfire crisis strategy, for example. And that's basically just to make sure that we are making science communication a purposeful part of research. We are making sure that we are embedding not just communication staff, but also stakeholders inside of how we are framing our questions for research, and so that we can talk about that. So fostering co-learning, sharing preliminary results, that goes back into that workshop thing that you saw earlier on the graph where folks were interested in. So that's holding workshops and sharing some of our information, where it's not necessarily saying, hey, this is the final publication, but it is saying like, hey, we have some of this information that you can utilize in your day-to-day work now. And then we can still work together to ask more questions as we move along this research process. And then of course, tailoring products for the audience. As you saw before, in a little montage that I do things from congressional visits to just sending information to national forests, to city governments, and so on and so forth. The research that we're doing is not always the same for each organization. So what that means is we have to make sure we're erring on the side of the, I have here as the most common denominator. What that means is making sure that the work is digestible. It's plain language. It's making sure that we can actually share that out and that it's short and succinct. And then of course, at the end of the day, picking up the phone and building relationships. That's the most important thing that we can do. It's when you have a problem that you can't solve, it's knowing that there's people out there that you can share this information with to make sure it gets to the people who need it the most. And so looking forward to the future, for non-research entities that perhaps you're not producing the science yourself. So again, looking to relationship building, whether or not that's your communication staff or your research staff itself, telling success stories. That's been one of the most useful things that we've had. Sharing out, hey, working with communication, delivering science to folks, taking in that information is going to make your science better. It's going to make the application, the practical application better. It's also going to help practitioners, but also becoming a bridge for your target audience. So communities, again, they respond well to perceived value. So again, it's making sure that you are a trusted source, and if you aren't that trusted source, being able to share that information with someone who is, and to build that community in which they can share that information on your behalf. And I think that's it.
All right, thank you so much, AJ. So again, biggest bounding box, U.S. federal government, and also very impressive that y'all have stepped into that space of digesting some of the research and getting it out into our communities. Next, we're going to hear from the statewide level. So Clesi Bennett's going to take it away.
All right, thank you. My name is Clesi Bennett. I'm a senior environmental scientist with the California Natural Resources Agency. Really happy to be here. I'm going to talk a bit about how nature-based solutions factor into our climate policy at the state level, specifically focusing on urban forestry and about how research underpins these. So for a little bit of level setting, there are a lot of different definitions of nature-based solutions out there. For our purposes, what we're really talking about is land management practices or activities that are increasing the health and resilience of our natural systems. So we have two statewide overarching climate strategies. We've got the California Climate Adaptation Strategy, which is really our resilience roadmap for how we're going to adapt to climate change in the future. This is organized around 6 North Stars, one of these, in the green box in the corner, being on implementing and accelerating nature-based solutions, including urban greening and urban forestry. This strategy is really underpinned by an effort that we take about every 5 years or so to conduct the California Climate Change Assessment. We're in the 5th iteration of this now, and this is where we downscale global climate change projections to understand what climate impacts we're going to be facing over the next century or so. In addition to these projections, we'll fund original research or conduct that research ourselves in understanding what we really need to do to be resilient to extreme heat, wildfire, flood, drought, etc. So our other statewide climate policy is the scoping plan. The scoping plan is the state's roadmap to meeting our greenhouse gas reduction goals as well as our carbon neutrality goal. The 2022 scoping plan was the first time that lands or nature-based solutions were included in this plan in a quantitative manner. Prior to this, they had been included qualitatively as a discussion piece, but there was an executive order and then subsequent legislation that required science-based data and modeling of our lands. And so this looked like understanding whether our landscapes were contributing to or helping us meet our carbon neutrality goal. So looking at and modeling future land management scenarios under different climate change scenarios to understand whether our lands would be a sink or a source or both at different times. I don't know where that little flag came about. Sorry about that. So we have a lot of state strategies, as you can tell from the slide, and you probably already know. Our Natural Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy is meant to feed into these two larger state strategies on climate change. And the way that the land strategy works is essentially pulling up from our sector-specific or impact-specific or regional-specific strategies that include nature-based solutions, that are thinking about this intersection of lands and climate, and identify what are the priority actions or nature-based solutions that we want to take throughout California. And so these are based on what the literature is telling us. They're based on practitioner experience, public input, tribal input. Really, it's a combination of different factors that we use to identify what those priority nature-based solutions are, and then those get routed up into the scoping plan for modeling and into the adaptation strategy, where we set goals and metrics around that. So our climate smart land strategy is divided into these 8 landscapes. These 8 landscapes are based on the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change's greenhouse gas accounting methodology, and meant to be in alignment with these for when we are taking stock of how we're meeting our goals. For this symposium, we're most interested in the developed lands section here. So developed lands, these are our communities, our cities, our suburbs. It's where we've got urban forests and community green spaces. They cover about 6% of the state. You can see the concentrated areas in red in the map there. And probably don't have to tell you all, but healthy urban forests and green spaces have the ability to deliver a number of benefits, including mitigating extreme heat like we see today. So recently, we expanded upon this body of work to set nature-based solution targets. We released these earlier this year on Earth Day. These were called for in legislation back in 2022, and the Natural Resources Agency, along with their Resources Board and the Department of Food and Ag, were called on to set an ambitious range of targets to both drive towards our carbon neutrality goal as well as foster adaptation and resilience. So our target setting approach was meant to be based in the best available science. We were looking towards nature-based solutions that increase health and resilience of lands. We pulled on various modeling and projections that the state has undertaken before, as I mentioned in my earlier slides. It was meant to drive on both of those overarching climate strategies as well. And so when we were calculating these targets, which are quantitative numbers, we were looking at how lands are currently managed and what carbon and other climate implications were. We were looking at what could be scaled, what was technically and practically feasible, and what we could measure into the future. These were the targets that we set. These targets, in addition to the process I just laid out, were also informed by an expert advisory committee that was called for in that same legislation. And this committee released a set of recommendations for us in setting these targets. And this committee was made up of academic experts, of practitioners who are working on the ground in implementation, and experts in tribal and indigenous knowledges, as well as environmental justice advocates. And so these targets, they're annual, and this is what they will deliver. So now we are moving towards implementation and how we will track progress. So we have 3 kind of arms of our progress tracking that we are diving in on now, and that includes really getting our hands around what is happening across all different landscapes and all different practices, which is quite a daunting task. But we know that this will take a mix of utilization of remote sensing data, as well as survey and on-the-ground data collection. We will also be creating standard methods to understand how we're measuring and tracking the climate outcomes of these actions. And this is an effort that the Air Resources Board is currently kicking off. And I'll say in relation to the urban forestry space, they just released an RFP last month about quantifying the health and ecosystem benefits that are delivered through healthy urban forest and green spaces. So we are funding and supporting a lot of research to really understand what the outcomes of these different nature-based solutions can be. And then lastly, we will be updating our state's natural merchandise carbon inventory, which uses a mix of remote sensing data, modeling, and on-the-ground data as well. So with that, I will turn it over to the next speaker.
All right, so again, heard from the federal level, we brought it down to the state level, now we're going to bring it down to the municipal level and that local level. So John Swae is going to talk us through what's going on in the Bay Area. Reminder, again, to follow the QR code, and if you're looking for more information about the speakers, the bios are in the program, so definitely reference that.
Thanks, Ken. Hello, everyone. I'm John Swae. I work for the City of San Francisco Public Works Department in our Urban Forestry group. I think it's amazing to see such a massive turnout here. I think if Francisco had told me I'd be presenting in front of 200 Dodgers fans, I'd be intimidated, but I feel very comfortable in this moment. So I'm going to try to condense what we've done in San Francisco in 10 years into 8 minutes here. So San Francisco Public Works, the Bureau of Urban Forestry, we maintain all the street trees in San Francisco. And we have a parks department that maintains trees in city parks. And today our Street Tree SF program maintains all 125,000 street trees, and we also maintain sidewalks damaged by tree roots. But only 8 years ago, we were only funded to care for a very small portion of those trees, about 28,000 trees. And this was due to successive years of budget cuts from the city onto the urban forestry budget that left us with declining staff numbers and just the inability to address all the tree needs. And so what ended up happening is that our crews were inspecting trees and putting signs like these on the trees, sending them to property owners saying, hey, we're transferring this tree to you. This is going to be your responsibility. This is a gift. This was a wildly unpopular policy. We had people telling us they're going to cut the trees down, they're not going to maintain the trees, they don't know how to maintain trees, they can't afford to maintain trees. And we knew this was true. I mean, this is a big burden to put on property owners. From the sidewalk repair costs, to the cost of pruning small to larger trees, to potential liability claims that homeowners might face. So we know we needed to develop a better way and a more comprehensive solution to turn this around. So the first step for us was developing a policy plan, and that was our urban forest plan. Our urban forest plan really set the vision for creating a citywide street tree maintenance program that should be run by the city. We had done research that showed that these programs are more effective and successful than property owner programs. We had to conduct a study to determine what it would take to actually implement such a program. And then we had a ballot measure put before voters to actually come up with the money to actually run that program. So the first step, this is where sort of policy, science, and economics collided. We commissioned a financial study to look at how we would really pull together a municipal managed street tree program, what it would take. And so we looked at different funding models, but we had to develop a model for all of our maintenance needs over the long term, because this was going to be a stable annual funding plan. And one of the pieces of information that we fed into the model was annual mortality for trees. And so we put in a 4% annual mortality for trees because we found kind of a generic stat around urban trees. This impacted the model because it required us to calculate how many removals and the expense of those removals that would be going into the program. In hindsight, if we had had better science, we'd probably be looking at something closer to 1 to 2%. And it would be great to do a more direct urban tree mortality study for San Francisco or street trees that we could use going forward. And now that we are a few years in the program, we'd love to work with researchers maybe on conducting such a study. So in the end, the study recommended a parcel tax based on the size of the parcel, its frontage. And so in this case, you can see small apartments and small homes would pay less than larger buildings, with the nexus determined that there are more street trees on larger property, in front of larger properties than smaller properties. This was also strategic because almost 80% of parcels in San Francisco are small homes and apartments. And so when we calculated this out, they would only be paying $40 a year compared to all those ballooning expenses I had shown in that previous slide. So this also then voted well for a parcel tax, which requires a 2/3 vote of voters, 67%. And so we thought this was strategic in getting most people on board with this proposal. But we couldn't do this alone. The city, of course, can come up with a technical solution in our studies. But we also really needed to relied on our nonprofit organizations in San Francisco. That's Friends of the Urban Forest. And they were really able to turn out people at City Hall, do the campaigning, do the public advocacy. We couldn't have done this without them. And then the third piece was our politicians. We really needed city will. So in City Hall, now State Senator Scott Blain was our board supervisor who really took this on. And together, these three groups, had this shared goal of improved city policy funding for street tree maintenance. And I can see now, being here today, we could have probably had a research arm that could have informed the technical solution we had proposed. So in 2016, this went on the ballot as the Healthy Trees, Safe Sidewalks initiative. In our polling, we found that a lot of people, while they love trees, they also love safe sidewalks free of tripping hazards. And so the measure made sure to communicate that and the need for repairing sidewalks from tree damage. And this is the actual language that went on the ballot measure, setting aside $19 million. And what's flipped here is that our City Hall officials decided they didn't want to add another parcel tax. They didn't want to burden property owners. And so they were willing to put it on as a general fund set aside. So the city was saying, we're willing to set this much money aside per year to fund this program because you made such a strong case. And it passed by 80% approval. So now we're in the situation of figuring out how to upscale our program pretty significantly. And the first step was developing new tree data. So on the left side, you can see we had our first street tree census, our first citywide street tree inventory. And that's where we learned we have up to 125,000 trees. We used that data to develop our maintenance plan, which is in this heat map, which identified where the worst, we call it the worst first. So these are areas of the city that have the worst maintenance needs. And so when we kicked off the program, we were prioritizing maintaining and pruning and removing trees in those red and orange zones. And then also scaling up all our hiring. So we needed to increase our arborist crews, our cement shop. We needed new bucket trucks, chainsaws, equipment. And then part of our proposal was mixing our internal crews with contractors. And so getting new contracts for tree maintenance was also important at that stage. But the results sort of speak for themselves. These are the years before property. You can see we're maintaining about 2,000 trees a year. And then now we've been maintaining about 7 times as many of those trees. And these are just a snapshot from the last few years, but we expect these numbers to keep going up as the trees get cleaned up. And so overall, on our first round of pruning, we're about 75% through the first round of pruning. We have about 25% of the trees left. This has taken us about 6 years. But because so much deferred maintenance, so many trees that hadn't been maintained, it's just taking longer to move through the first round. But I think once we get through the first round, we'll be able to move much more quickly. But I mean, it was a maintenance measure that was put on the ballot. There was no money included in the maintenance measure for planting. And so while the maintenance funding we got will maintain all new trees that are planted, it didn't provide money for all the trees that need to be planted because we had to remove 10,000 hazardous trees in our maintenance program. So this is where we're kind of struggling and figuring out our next move. We also have 30,000 vacant planting sites that are a priority for us. And this is, this wouldn't have been our first selection for a nursery in San Francisco, but the stars kind of aligned, and this is a Caltrans parcel in downtown San Francisco where we have been transforming this with the help of Caltrans and Cal Fire into a street tree nursery where we'll be growing over 1,000 to 2,000 trees per year and running a jobs training program out of that site. And I hope you can all come visit. And then the last thing, we're really successful. This is huge for us. We received a $12 million IRA Inflation Reduction Act grant for our Justice Jobs Planting the Trees program. So this will allow us to fill many of those vacant planting sites throughout the city and use the nursery as our tree planting headquarters in San Francisco. And so I think if there's just one moral of the story, it's that I think positive change is possible. This took 10 years to get to where we are, but I think we've got a lot of smart people in the room who can make things happen here as well. And don't forget the importance of planting money. Thank you.
Inspirational, right? All right, last but not least, we're going to hear from the Executive Director of California ReLeaf, Blain.
I have to say, I really just appreciate the fact that she didn't say, well, we're working at the state level, and then we're working at the local, and then we're at the itty-bitty level. For all, those of you who don't know who California ReLeaf is, we're the umbrella organization. Oh, wait a minute, I gotta do this. ReLeaf is the umbrella organization for the nonprofits in the state of California, and we have been since the early 90s. Earlier, we were a program of another nonprofit. But that means that we bring a place for them to come together and share their information so that they're not just working alone in their communities. We also seek funding for them, and we also do advocacy for them. And that's where research is important to all of that, but especially in education and advocacy. I had the good fortune, and so I'm going to talk about California ReLeaf, and I'm also going to talk about what I learned at Sacramento Tree Foundation because I was there for 6 years beforehand. So I got to work with Ray Trethewey, and I got to work with Desiree Bachman. So Ray was the one who brought Dr. Greg McPherson to California. He advocated really hard to have Greg come here to do urban forest research, and that was super important. He met him at conferences. And then Desiree Bachman showed up at Sac Tree a month before I got there, and she was a doctor of public health, actually on the staff. It was sort of amazing. And she taught us an awful lot. Desiree's the reason why I started putting research footnotes in grant applications. So, and before Desiree left, she also had us do research where she got this grant, and then she went back to the California Department of Public Health, and so I got to manage it, which was kind of a shock. But you can see one of the things too, that when you are doing research at the local level, you want to also have good graphics. So this shows that the Green RX program, which was really talking about the intersection of how much canopy and what the impacts on human health are. I don't say population health anymore because that's something more obscure. It's human health. And so we were doing it for the 6-county area in Sacramento. And we had two hypotheses, that the health behaviors and outcomes in urban greening are statistically related, with more urban greening being better for health and supportive of healthy behaviors, and that certain behaviors and health outcomes are positively influenced by the presence, certain ones versus others. So, and this is a LiDAR study because we were showing what the canopy was. You know, LiDAR takes the pictures at different levels, and to keep people awake during research conversations, I'd say, yeah, you could see Governor Jerry Brown there underneath the Capitol. This is an older presentation. So, you know, these are the kinds of things we were talking about. The association or correlation with ADHD, asthma, overweight, diabetes. Because I was not a doctor of public health, we had an incredible advisory council who included 4 PhDs, 4 Masters of Public Health, and 2 MDs. Terry Duarte, Greg McPherson, Mary Northridge, Amy Sisson, Ray Trethewey, Lena Trochet from Sac County, and others. So we were really lucky to have all that help. We also had Bill Sullivan involved from the U.S. Forest Service Research and Jeff Donovan from the U.S. Forest Service Research. So the question becomes, why were we doing this? Why were these relatively small nonprofits? I mean, we're only 5 people in California, only 4 or 5 people. I'm trying to hire somebody. And Sacramento Tree Foundation with 30 people. Why are we doing this research? It's because it was important to the work that we were doing in the community, and a lot of the work that the nonprofits do, and I'll say it more later, but it's advocacy, right? But there's lots of different ways that nonprofits can engage in research, and one of them is we are incredible data resources for scientists. I'll show you an example in a second. It helps us talk to civic leaders and city staff about why they should support funding for this. It engages the next generation as urban advisors and advocates. That's really important. And connecting with community members. It appeals to your inner nerd. You know, I tend to find that tree people are kind of nerdy. I don't know what it is. They like talking, they love trees a lot, and they just want to talk about it in details. And then it enlightens the public, and I say eventually on here, not to be sarcastic, but you know, we were sending around research papers and all that, but it took a while before the New York Times published it, you know, and I think a lot of the reason they published it was because Bette Midler had $1 million and was doing a lot of work on the East Coast. But there you go. So researchers are our friends. So I met Matt Ritter like less than a year after I joined Sacramento Tree Foundation because he wanted our U4 together. And that's a really old term for some of you who've been around, but it's urban forest effects model, meaning what does it do for us? So that's the spreadsheets. And then Laura Roman showed up, and you see that this is the lemon cake, right? Because Laura Roman wanted access to our file cabinets, and there weren't just 3 file cabinets. There was a room full, almost like this, of file cabinets with this mud data on who had gotten trees from us at Sacramento Tree Foundation, because we gave out these free trees, and she wanted to do follow-up data. So she was literally pulling open those folders and going through them paper by paper to find out who was where and what trees were. I mean, God bless her, you know, it's like, how can you do that? But anytime she came to come use the files and give us an update on what was happening, she brought lemon cake for us. it helps, you know. When you talk about the nonprofit, we'll take anything. Thank you. So how to use it? Okay, as a nonprofit. And, you know, we've had government, all these bigger bodies that came before me, they were all government, right? We're non-government. But, so we are there to hopefully help with impacting policy and to speak up. And that is the major thing. And what is the major thing that we have found is helpful when you're talking policy is the research, right? It's not just us saying, oh, we're good tree people, you know, this is something you should do. It's to have the facts on what it does. So the blossoming of research over the last 10 years, at one point, I don't know about y'all, but at one point it seemed like most of the people doing research was Greg McPherson and Dave Nowak for a while there. And then in the last 10 years, it's just expanded beyond that. So then you can present the findings to state and local government. You can fund and lead to more targeted research. You can read these yourself, change school design standards. You know, that's an important thing. That's a really difficult thing to do. Help underserved communities influence the healthcare approach, and that's happened a lot. You know, the doctors are giving that kind of prescription. And then inform community members and activate community members to take care of their trees. And so, and when you're at a nonprofit, these kind of research things somehow just fall into your lap. It could have been because Ray was like that, or because it was Sacramento, I don't know what. But see, these are some of the ones that I've been involved with personally. You know, air quality research, and there was the VOCs, right? That was, and it was a very exciting discussion. The Sacramento Air Quality Task Force, vegetation near roadway. That's the whole thing about, does it really help to have trees by the side of the roadway or not? And if you're talking the East Coast, it's one thing where the trees, you know, grow naturally and they go all the way to the ground, versus the idea that in the city it can slip underneath the trees, the bad air. Kaiser, we were involved a little bit in that. And sometimes you get involved in scientific studies and you're not like doing a lot of details and all that. In this case, Doug Wildman from Friends of the Urban Forest called me up and said, we need somebody with more match for this project. And we were able to provide match. So it's cool, and I have 1 minute. Okay, I'm going to mention the volunteer study. That was where remember we had all the smoke a couple years ago? And I was watching purple air all the time to see how bad the air was in Sacramento. At one point I called up Francisco, and I ended up talking to, I'm blanking on his name, Jeff Donovan up in Northwest. And I said, what would happen if you took like, you know, tree canopy and the information that you can get from the cleaner air people, or the purple air people, and see, you know, do people have better air near their houses? Well, we haven't gotten funding for that yet. I still think it's a great idea, but right now we're involved in the Urban Forest Economic Impact Study for California. And a year ago, we took some extra funding and said that we were going to purchase Planet Geo for our network, because for our network, we're planting all these trees with the money from the state, but they don't give us money for maintaining. And you know, this is a hot state, and it's getting hotter. So how are we gonna keep the trees alive? This is a big deal. So I think one of the things we have to do, we have to freaking know where the trees are. And so that's why we got Planet Geo, and if you're a network member of California ReLeaf, you get access to it for free. And the second thing I did after we got Planet Geo was I went around and I talked to all our research buddies like Laura, and I said, hey, how can you use this data once we get it filled up? You know, that sort of thing. So, advocacy. This is we have a lot of resources on the ReLeaf website. You should go there, we have a Google box and they have a right-hand corner. Just put in something that you need to know and it'll be easier for you to find it. But as far as advocacy, everybody hates the word advocacy when we tell them that. It's really not that painful. And on this website, we have something about, you just try, you can go tell the community how wonderful the trees are, you know, where you're getting to plant trees. In a lot of ways, it's the same thing when you go talk to electeds or people in the state government. Just tell them the amazing things, but you have research behind it. So check this out. We even have sample talking points, or just call us and we'll help walk you through if you're a nonprofit and you want that help. And the other thing is to make the research accessible. At Factory, we had this, it has just snippets of public health data, and I have a couple of paper copies, but this thing actually stood up, and it was round. And another time I took a triangular thing when I went to do some advocacy in DC, and it's better to have a triangular thing because you can flatten it and stick it in your portfolio. Just and thank you.
Start with the toughest question of all. If you were a tree, where would you want to be planted or plant yourself?
That is a tough question. Probably, okay, so I can't remember the exact name of the mountain, but last year I was in Japan and I was in a town called Kinosaki Onsen. And they have, at the top, there's like a tea shop and it's a beautiful like Buddhist temple as well. I definitely think I want to be up there. There's a lot of like very beautiful Japanese maples up there, which is what my like little profile picture is from. See like just a clipping of the maple tree in there, and it's just a beautiful place. You can always see like the town and the ocean as well. So I think I'd want to go there.
I think today, given it's about 105 degrees in Sacramento, where I live, I would be a very large shade tree in my yard, shading my house.
I grew up on the East Coast, and so I'd like to be a tree next to a brook. We didn't call them creeks back there, we called them brooks, in the woods.
And since it's my favorite place, I would like to be planted on hanging from the cliffs above the ocean in Big Sur, California.
Hopefully we got some good visuals with that and some Zen moments as well. Awesome. I mean, we all do a lot of work to, again, enhance the urban and community forest, but I don't know how much we actually think about, well, where would we, if we could select one location for us to plant ourselves, where would we want to be for, you know, potentially hundreds of years? Anyway, with that aside, let's get into some of the other meat and potatoes that relate a little bit more to some of what you guys touched on. I will say that this is kind of my soapbox, is figuring out how do you take research and translate it into actual practice. I moved across the country about 11 years ago. Actually, funny enough, my mother, bless her heart, she texted me a photo yesterday and said, oh, 11 years ago today, and it was a photo of me standing in front of my car holding a printed atlas pointing to the state of Michigan where I was at, and then pointing to Los Angeles so that, hey, in a week I'm gonna make it out there and I'm gonna transplant myself to LA and do my work here. One of the main reasons I came here was because we are doing such innovative work to figure out how cities can be a part of these environmental and conservation strategies that we know we need to be working on. I started off my work here in the private sector. I was working for an urban design and landscape architecture firm at the time, and I was trained as an ecologist and a landscape architect. So I had the already within me that methodology where, oh, anything that I'm doing in practice, I need to make sure that it's based in research, right? I had such a hard time going into the private sector and finding how it was that I could actually access the research. Luckily, Stephanie Landrigan from UCLA's Extension had given me a job, and I was teaching botany at the time at UCLA as well. So I luckily had credentials to tap back into academia. I then taught at USC and then Cal Poly Pomona as part of a strategy for me to continue to be able to access the treasure troves of research that are usually behind that firewall, that paywall. I found that to be absolutely inappropriate, where I was like, this cannot happen. If we're trying to create, again, plans, policies, and actual projects on a daily basis, we need to be making sure that research is informing that. And the research is happening, but we're having a hard time translating. We're having a hard time sharing between those things. So one of the questions that I honestly just want to know more from each of you is, where do you get your research? Is it from, again, certain online platforms that you're able to tap into? I will say that I've been very happy that over the last decade of me doing work here, a lot more folks are publishing in open access journals. Please keep doing more of that. Is it that you're developing relationships with the scientists? Because I felt like a lot of my time and energy was reaching out to the national, the national organizations, the local nonprofits, the academic institutions, so on and so forth. So is it developing those personal relationships with either the institution and or with that individual researcher or professor? Strategies of how it is that other practitioners that are in the room might be able to dive into some of those resources, / it might, again, plant a seed in a researcher's head of, oh, if you guys are already going to a site like that, or expecting an exchange like that, to help them to also find, the avenues of getting their research out. So anyone want to start with kind of explaining where it is that you get your research from?
So federal-wise and specifically for the Forest Service are a little bit unique since we do all of our research in-house as well. Of course, we have partners who work at universities and other partners as well. But all of our research is open to the public. It's free. We have a platform, it's called Tree Search. That's actually where we put all of our research articles into, and you can download those for free. Additionally, if you reach out to any of our Forest Service researchers, scientists, they will be more than happy to share your papers, and that's probably true from any either researcher, professor, what have you. If you ask them about their work, they're almost always willing to talk about it, to share it out with you. So it is, but I do recognize like the journaling and publications, that sometimes that can be a little bit of a barrier if you're trying to reach some sort of conclusion or get some of that information, because a lot of them are behind paywalls. But at least for the federal government, all of that is free and open. You just have to reach out, or again, you can look for the Forest Service, at least you can look at our website.
So for us, it really depends. We fund a fair amount of research to either be conducted by in-house experts and scientists or externally through contracts. We also, for the effort that I was referencing, we've got a number of different advisory bodies or committees that have academics or practitioners on there, which meet regularly. A lot of them are subject to open meeting rules, so it's a very public process of getting briefed on various research. The other thing that has been a real push, I would say, over the past couple of years is to tap into our in-house expertise. There's a lot of really talented scientists and engineers who work for the state, and sometimes it's just a matter of breaking down state agency silos, which can be quite thick and impenetrable sometimes. So creating these interagency working groups and developing these relationships, tapping into each of their networks. So I think it kind of boils down to relationship building.
I was going to say, for the last 10, 15 years, I've just pretty much been begging people for PDFs of articles, right? Call up the researchers and say, hey, can you send me that? Kathy Wolf was great because with the U.S. Forest Service Research, she had set up the Green Cities Good Health place, which had nice notes and nice synopses for people to understand what was in the research without having to read the whole thing, piece of paper. And I just read the intro and the conclusions usually. And then there is the stuff now that's available through the U.S. Forest Service, which is great. But personal relationships for the academic researchers, I think, still counts, right? If you can't afford to pay for it. I tried to get California ReLeaf to pay for it when I was in SAC training. They said, no way, we can't afford that.
Yeah, I think from the program management side, since San Francisco is such a unique place, or we like to think it is, that we have lots of ideas for very specific types of research we would want to do in our city, and we don't have a researcher on staff, and we haven't had luck kind of until recently maybe, but developing that partnership with researchers. So we have a lot of data we've collected. We have all our tree inventory data. I know Cal Poly's been using some of that, but we actually had interns go out and analyze every coastline oak tree in San Francisco in the street environment to try to get at that question about native trees and how they're doing in the environment. So it's actually a really interesting study and results, but we just haven't been able to push it over the line because I'm too busy to finalize a research study. The storms that we've had over the last few years, we have so many trees that have gone down. We really like to understand the species and what those failures entailed. So we have data, we just don't have the ability or the staff to really dig into that in a meaningful way. So I think we'd like to do more of that, and we'd like to develop some more customized research relevant to our work.
Well, then we kind of, so if and when we get the research as practitioners, I have then at least experienced in my own career, then the challenge of how do you understand that research? And I'm lucky enough to be trained in reading peer-reviewed journal articles and understanding the facts and the figures and how to navigate that. Not everybody has that vocabulary, that understanding. For sure, not everybody has that time. So time is a huge limiting factor that I have found in all of the various sectors that I've worked for. A lot of times people aren't wanting to pay you to sit down and read a lengthy journal article or a book or talk to an expert in something. So my next question is, how do we do better at translating, of taking something that is written in the kind of standard, normal way that researchers are, needing to publish. They have certain standards and their kind of discipline. But then how do we make sure that it is somehow getting translated, and who translates that, and how do we translate it? I know AJ has been talking through his presentation about some of the strategies, so hopefully we can help elevate more of those, but then thoughts from the other folks in terms of knowing the position that you're in, the limited time, the limited resources that you have, what would make it easier for you to be able to get access to and then actually understand that research and be able to share it then with the employees and the other stakeholders that you're working with? Who wants to start?
Yeah, I think time, that's the big challenge, I think, is time. And depending on the level of decision maker you're talking to, there's less and less of it. I appreciated, AJ, some of the items you laid out, email blasts or newsletters with, short paragraphs, bottom line up front, bluffs, or whatever people call them. Briefings, 10-minute briefings, white papers, one-pagers, those things are huge, I think. Being able to distill the most critical points into a paragraph, like it has to happen, essentially.
Yeah, and I think anywhere you can get it, right? And so a lot of times it really is reading the intro, which does give you kind of the gist of what's going on, or the conclusions, not to be facetious or there. But, and I think we also have a good staff at ReLeaf, where I know Megan, our communication person, likes the research and she likes to share it out, so we're sharing at different levels. And Victoria reads it because of what she does as well. And Alex is kind of making research stuff. So we're trying to convey it to people in a way that's digestible as much as we can. But any help, I was really saying, well, AJ, that sounds like your brand new job, right? So that you could do that for all of us.
Yeah, I don't know, could there be like an embedded researcher program where, I don't know, maybe from the city side, cities could apply to have someone assigned to work with our Forestry group for 6 months to kind of interpret research that might be relevant to us in our programming, but also help us move forward research that we've been wanting to. So I think we probably need a lot more hand-holding because we're just busy pruning trees and repairing sidewalks, so.
Well, I guess that brings me to another question that's been kind of bubbling up is like, are you all being proactive and reaching out to researchers and saying, hey, I need data to then go into a grant application or into a plan or policy? I'm identifying that you are in that space. Can you assist? Or is it the opposite, where researchers are saying, hey, we've got funding and or we've got students, and we then would love to, have you as a client and as a partner on this, and like, how does that kind of also relationship building happen?
So I'll say for myself, my researchers are probably annoyed with me reaching out to them because of how much I do. I know we have Francisco in the back, and I reach out to him constantly. Laura was here as well, she presented earlier. I'm always reaching out to folks for various needs, whether or not that's, again, we have congressional visits, whether or not it's for our website or public-facing information. I'm always reaching out to try to digest some of that information. I also kind of have that classical training, so it is a little bit easier for me since I have a PhD, but I also recognize that that is still also a barrier in terms of reaching out to folks and trying to understand not just the work that they have, but also getting the time for them to help digest that work. And that they always don't have that time, for being realistic. So I think one of the biggest things about reaching out is really, it goes back to trying to build interest, not just for your community, but also showing value in the work that a researcher is doing, and value for the community that you're working with. So if you can introduce a researcher to a community that definitely is going to be using that work, is going to utilize that, they will definitely see the value in that, and they will help out to work to move forward with that, or at least they should be, because that's something that can actually help them advance their career as well as help out the community.
I would say for us, it's a little bit of both. It's a lot of reaching out and asking for data, or developing those partnerships, creating contracts with researchers external to the state, and then also having folks come to us and say, hey, we want to give you a briefing. We want to show you about this new publication we have. I think time is difficult on both sides again. But I think that's why events like this are really important, to bring both researchers and policymakers and practitioners together. And so having more things like this, or sending scientific staff who may be employed at various agencies to conferences or whatnot to present on what they're doing, learn what others are doing, bring that information back, communicate that up the chain.
Yeah, I agree, and it is reaching out to people and asking, and certainly from the nonprofit, from the role model I had, it was developing relationships with researchers, and certainly we've been in touch with Matt Ritter and Jen Yost and Cal Poly about things, and they've been in touch with us, and it does become becomes a cycle, as well as other urban forest researchers. And like I said, we'll take it wherever we can get it, and I have to say the internet has made life a lot easier in the last 10 years, right? Or Google anything. And then you can go call a friend that you know who has access to that to get you the article. So.
We don't have to rely on microfiche anymore.
Say what?
What did you say?
Oh, microfiches? They don't even know what that is.
Well, a few years back when we were developing our proposal for that maintenance plan for San Francisco, we figured we needed to pull out all the big guns we could. And there's a research station in the East Bay in San Francisco. So we reached out to them and had a few meetings with them trying to broker some. We weren't even really sure what we needed. We're like, we need help. We just want to initiate this big policy change. And could the research and having the name of the Forest Service behind us be helpful? And for whatever reason, there just nothing really gelled at the time. I don't know if it was a funding issue or just we didn't identify a project. But I will say that Miranda, Laura, and Natalie have reached out to us about our Inflation Reduction Act grant, and we were very excited to get approached by them to work with them on looking at mortality and survivability of all the trees that we'll be planting as part of the Inflation Reduction Grant. So I hope this is the beginning of a longer term partnership with the Forest Service around research in San Francisco.
Well, we're going to be diving into a lot more of these kind of, yes, let's figure out how researchers are talking then to practitioners, and we're kind of developing questions and research experiments as well as projects together in our group activity this afternoon. So a little plug to stick around all the way until the end of the day, because we are really going to get into some good work in terms of making those kind of linkages and helping to flesh out some, kind of scope out some potential research that needs to happen in the LA area and beyond. Anyway, I want to open it up to a couple wild card questions, at least one I think we have time for, if not a little bit more. But Edith, do you want to find someone from the audience to ask a question?
Hi, my name is Sarah Waters and I live here in Los Angeles. Specifically, I would like to know if any of you have run across research with regard to the property values and the relationship of tree canopy cover property values. Specifically, there are situations, I live in a HOA, and you always have to deal with the HOA and the private concerns of HOA members with regard to planting trees and maintaining trees. And it's always helpful to have a little research about how the unit value is going to go up if we can plant proper trees.
It's funny, because when I was putting my talk together, I was thinking about when I first got into this, 2008, property value and how trees increase in property value was one of the key things that we talked about a lot. We also talked about how it made it better in the business districts. If there were trees, people wanted to come shop longer, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's definitely, and I don't know how much it's been refreshed as data, but that is definitely around. And you can check out our website, Google it. You can also call me or whatever, but that's around. And I'm sure it's changed in the last 10 years, I'm just not sure. Is there anybody in the audience who's done any property value research lately? Project.
Think about it for activities, there's an activity this afternoon. Is that okay? Thank you, yes.
Yeah, we have time for one more. So another wild card question. You want to?
Hi, I'm Liza Piquet with Forest Service International Programs, and I'm very, very curious about how you would deliver our science to resistant communities or those who are really wary of the science and the research.
So for us, it's really about building relationships with trusted sources within the given community. So we have researchers who work in some of our Pacific islands, such as Palau, for example. And those researchers are essentially going out and reaching out to trusted community sources and basically saying, hey, I have this work. Let's talk about the value of this work for the community. Let's make sure that this is a need for the community and that they can see the value in it as well. And then also for that person to act as a bridge, because we are the federal government, so there's always going to be some inherent either bias towards us in some capacities or in some communities, and some of that's warranted. But it's really about making sure that you have a medium that can act on your behalf and that is trusted, that can speak about some of the work that you're having in order to get a foot in the door with these communities. And then over time, as you start to build those relationships and as you continue to conduct that research, that trust building continues. So for us, that's sort of our big thing, is really just making sure that we're partnering with the right folks that can get our foot in the door with these communities.
I just want to make sure I understand the question. You said that people were reluctant about trees, and I know that sometimes there's been the situation where people are reluctant to have trees planted in the neighborhood because they're afraid it's going to change the neighborhood, and especially if it's a neighborhood that hasn't been invested in much in the past. They're afraid it's going to make it, green gentrification. That's what came up when we were doing the cap and trade trees. Is that what you were referring to?
No, referring to communities in particular or
or stakeholder groups that are resistant to research or science?
Just resistant to research, period.
Or wary of scientists?
You know who we said, okay, at one point, we said that when we were talking about the health benefits of trees, we said the people that you had to come give that message to the neighborhood was like nurses, or people that were trusted in the community. So you needed to find somebody who was an ambassador that they would trust to somehow bring it. That's the only thing I can think of.
I think it also goes back to some of what was discussed in the panel this morning about the co-production of research questions and participatory research models, rather than this kind of like helicopter research that's just coming and studying these places without any input from those who are actually based there.
All right, well, we are right on time, and we've got a little announcement, and then we're gonna actually break for lunch. So get excited, because we've got lots of food that's still continuing. But quick announcement from the city of San Marino.
This has nothing to do with being in San Marino, but hi, my name is Laura. I'm the urban forester for the city of San Marino, but I'm here because I keep hearing a theme about cross-pollination, networking, breaking out of our silos, and I'm on the professional development committee of the Urban and Community Forestry Society, which is a national organization. How many of you are familiar with the Urban and Community Forestry Society? Okay, I see a small number of hands. So anyone that is in this room, you could be a member, you could be involved. We want all of you. It's a kind of big umbrella thing, whether you're a nonprofit person, an academic. And one of the things we are doing is creating local meetups and local networking events. And so right now, along with the Inland Urban Forest Council, we're gonna create, hopefully like in the month of October, we're gonna send out an email blast and come out to a brewery or some location. We're looking for locations. Our first meetup is going to be somewhere in the San Gabriel Valley, but the Inland Urban Forest Council is looking to create 3 meetups within their larger service area, which would be people out in Riverside, in the Inland Empire, and I think out in the desert communities. And as part of the Urban and Community Forestry Society, we're also looking for locations. So if you have a friend, an office, a space where you would like to host something like that, come find me. My name is spelled L-O-R-A, so don't confuse me with Laura, because that's L-A-R-A. So it makes me easier to find on the internet, the unusual spelling of my name. You can find me on LinkedIn or come talk to me at lunch.